Welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at the element of design we refer to as line. And just as a quick reminder, when we're talking about the elements of design, we're talking about the building blocks, sort of the structural, visual elements that work towards creating either an image or a sculpture or some sort of visual representation. So without delaying, let's get started. We're going to jump right in to investigating the concept of lines. We're going to switch over here, take a look at our presentation, and our primary learning goals for today are going to be the following. So number one, we need to understand that lines have the ability of making connections between what we see and emotions that we are feeling, and that artists will purposefully use various elements and the qualities of line or types of line in order to try and evoke a specific feeling or emotion in their audience. In order for us to be able to understand that process, we need to be able to also describe the different qualities of line so that we're able to carefully and clearly articulate our thinking. And this is going to be leading into the notions of contour drawing, and then also starting to think about how do we use these qualities or these types of lines in order to help us create visually engaging images. In particular, we could be thinking about contour drawings specifically. Okay? So this is going to be a hands-on activity, right? So you're going to need your sketchbook and perhaps either a colored marker or the Sharpie from your art kit, something in order to be able to kind of record what it is that you're going to be sketching out over the next few slides. So essentially, I'm going to be providing you with a word on the screen, and I'm going to be asking for you to be able to draw that word or the meaning of that word by just using a line, right? So no symbols, no representations, just line in its simplest form. Okay, so for example, if I were to use the word erratic, I might generate a line that kind of looks like this, right? Erratic means it's kind of all over the place. There's no clear sense of direction, changes in an unpredictable and unanticipated way. Right? So if you don't know what a word means, right, you want to be thinking about a strategy in order to kind of fill in that gap. Right? So the simplest thing to do would be to pause the video and look up the definition of the word in the dictionary, or using an online dictionary as well. This would be another option. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few seconds here to get yourself set up. You're going to need something to draw with as well as your sketchbook, and then we'll get started. Okay, so if you need a minute, pause the video here. Okay, so the first word that we're going to draw is the word peaceful. Okay, so as you're going through this process, think about what line quality creates peace. How would you do that with just a single solitary line? I'm going to give you about 15 seconds in order to do that. And if I'm moving too quickly, remember, again, just pause the video. Okay, our second word is nervous. How do you end up drawing Okay, our second word is nervous. What does a nervous word look like? Our third word is elegance. What does something that is elegant look like? What kind of line would you use in order to communicate the idea of elegance? Okay, right? The notions of being approachable, right? So, the idea of being welcoming. You know, this is somebody that you can kind of go up to and start a conversation with right away. You're not apprehensive in any way about coming up and interacting with somebody else. Right, so what does approachable look like if you were to draw it with one or a few different lines? Furious. How would you draw a line to communicate fury? One of my favorite words of all time is the idea of being stealthy. I kind of think of spies sneaking around and trying not to be seen by somebody else. How would you create or communicate that idea of being stealthy? And proud. What is a proud line? At rest. Right, so with being at rest, there is no motion. So how do you capture that idea of being at rest? By drawing one or a couple of different lines. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to take a look at is the idea of a fluid line. Okay, so fluid lines are drawn by moving the pen or the marker in one solid motion. Right? And what we're going to do is make sure that we're kind of drawing more from our elbow than we are from our fingers or our wrist, right? So that we can get that continuous line. Okay? So you should see that it looks solid overall, right? And we can do this with a variety of different types of line as well. Okay? Sketchy lines, on the other hand, okay, they are made with very quick movements, and this is typically happening either from the wrist or directly from the fingertips. And the lines are overlapping, and these are typically used primarily when we are sketching out or trying to figure out where we want to place a line, and they are, pardon me, they are exploratory in nature. And just like the fluid lines, right, we can use this sketchy line to create all sorts of different um, line qualities as well. Okay? Keeping in mind that much of the time, sketchy lines can look unfinished, which can be a little bit problematic from time to time, especially if your drawing is kind of halfway in between the fluid and the sketchy. Okay, so make sure that you're thinking about the type of line that you are going to be trying to use in your work. Okay, it's a really important decision for you to be making. Okay, so when we are talking about fluidity and sketchy lines, we are talking about different line types. But each of these, we can also think about different line qualities, and we have 6. We have line direction, we have curvy lines, sharp lines, thick lines, the weight of the line, as well as broken lines. When it comes to line direction, we actually have 3 different directions that we can think of. We have vertical, we have horizontal, okay, and we have the diagonal. Often when I'm thinking of direction, I use the analogy of a tree. When a tree is vertical, it's strong, it's proud, it is, standing tall. When a tree is horizontal, it's kind of already fallen over, it might be dead, it might be decaying, it's at rest, all of that potential energy is gone. And when it's diagonal, I think of the tree in the process of falling, and that creates that idea of motion. Okay? And through these decisions of the line direction, we can start to communicate specific ideas. Curvy lines, like the name implies, are very, very elegant and smooth. There's a sense of them being a little bit more delicate, and the way that these lines work together, right, are quite interesting because they can combine that idea of direction by thinking about the overall direction that the line is going, even though it is constantly changing. Sharp lines, in contrast, okay, are pointy, they're rigid, and they are also, really about that idea that different lines can communicate that sense of aggression or anger. Lines can also have different thicknesses, and primarily we'll kind of think of this in three different levels. We can think of thin, medium, and thick. Okay, and this is one of the most underused qualities of line because many people will just use one thickness. But when you start using a variety, it gets to be a lot more interesting because you're able to create emphasis in different areas. Okay, really, really important skill to be thinking about when creating your work. Okay? The next quality of line that we're going to talk about is line weight. And it's kind of hard to see this one with a marker. Okay? But this is about the pressure that we are using when applying the marker. So if I'm pressing really, really, really lightly, I get one type of visual effect. And if I'm pressing heavily, I'm going to get a stronger, darker line. And it's typically easier to see with something like a pencil, right? So it's barely noticeable or barely visible, and then it becomes much clearer by adding additional pressure. All right, and then the last quality of line that we are going to be taking a look at is that of what we call the broken line. Okay, a broken line is a implied line because there are spaces in between various elements. So we can have something as traditional as a dotted or dashed line, but we can also make up this broken line by using a variety of different shapes, for example, that are all the same, or we can create alternating patterns. And by putting these marks in sequence, we tend to be able to read these together as a line in its entirety. Okay? We're not always looking at each individual component. Okay? So we have the types of line, fluid and sketchy, and then we have the qualities as well. Okay? So the last thing that I'd like to talk to you about today is the idea that we don't have to use the different qualities of line in isolation. We can combine them together in very interesting and unique ways in order to help create visual variety in the drawings. Okay, so for example, I can have a very simple curvy line, but changing the thickness or making it an undulating line, a line that changes in thickness, I can turn that simple line into something that is much more ribbon-like. Okay, so you can see that there are some areas of the line that are wider, they're thicker, okay, and I'm filling those in with black, okay, and then they gradually taper and get narrower in order to create that almost that appearance that the line is kind of twisting a little bit. So this is an instance of where I have a curvy as well as thick line and thin line in order to create visual variety. Right, so this is one particular example, right? And there are lots of other ones as well. Okay, so the next thing that we can take a look at is perhaps, okay, I'm using my pencil this time. I'm going to, again, use the zigzag line, but I'm going to combine this one with pressure. Okay, so as I'm going up, I have light pressure, but as I bring the pencil down, I'm going to have heavier pressure. So now I'm using a combination of line weight as well as line sharpness in order to create the distinction in this particular line. Okay, so the last thing that we are going to talk about is just a quick review. So we know that we have two types of line, fluid lines and sketchy lines. We also have 6 different qualities of line that you can be thinking about, right? We have the line thickness, the thin versus thick. We have curved lines that are flowing and elegant, sharp lines that are pointy or zigzag. We can consider line direction, the vertical, horizontal, as well as the diagonal line. Right, we also have line weight, and that's where we are using pressure and pressing really heavily in order to create dark lines, or very lightly to create soft lines. And lastly, we have broken lines, which are kind of those dashed or dotted lines that are intermittent. And most importantly, when you use these, it helps to create visual variety and interest in your work. Thanks a lot. Have a great day. Looking forward to seeing you again soon.